This is your reminder that the BBC has yet to address the consistent transphobic leanings in its news coverage, and while the team behind Doctor Who is not connected to this in any way since this is a BBC-owned property, I'm going to keep pointing it out until the problem gets resolved. Links in a pinned comment below if you don't know what I'm talking about. I'll stop saying it when it stops being a problem. I can't finish a season and not rank it. That's just what I do. Hey folks, season 1 of Doctor Who is done and dusted, pun intended, and there's only one thing left for me to do. That is rank the episodes. Except I'm not going to do that immediately. I'll get to it. I want to give some overview thoughts first. At the start of all this, before the season began, I had a general hope that Russell T Davies, RTD, would bring more mature sensibilities as a writer. Now, I'd said that before and people blatantly misinterpreted what I meant. When I say mature, I don't mean adult content. I don't mean, outright stuff that would not have been allowed previously. I'm not talking about the kind of stuff Torchwood did. That's not what I mean by mature. By mature, I mean just the sensibilities of a more seasoned writer with a more mature view of the world. You can look at something like his work on It's a Sin, and you can see the maturity of his writing versus his own earlier work in a similar vein with something like the original Queer as Folk. And that's not to call Queer as Folk or earlier Doctor Who or even Torchwood necessarily bad, although I will call most of Torchwood bad. There is a certain childishness to a lot of it, a teenage sensibility. And I don't mean necessarily in the sophomoric sense, again, except for Torchwood, but just it doesn't feel like a particularly mature view of the world at times. You would get glimpses of a more mature perspective at times, but overall, it was somebody just there to have fun. And that's great. But I'd hoped for something a little bit more measured, a little bit more thoughtful. And I think we largely got that with the specials. But then we got the Christmas episode, which put me on a little bit of alert. I tried to hold on some degree of hope because, I don't usually vibe with the Christmas specials anyway because they just go for an energy that isn't my preferred version of Doctor Who. But then once we got to Space Babies, I realized, he's mostly just doing what he used to do when he ran the show back from 2005 to 2010. And yeah, he pretty much is. Rather than bring a more mature and seasoned writing sensibility, he has largely just gone back to what he did in his previous times. Sort of. What I think in many ways this is rather than just being a return to Russell T Davies as he was before, it's almost like Russell T Davies distilled and concentrated. All the aspects of him as a writer from his previous stretch are here. There isn't really much here that's like, that doesn't feel like RTD. No, pretty much all of it does, but it does cranked up a little bit higher, a little bit more concentrated. Space Babies is, again, pretty in line with what is typical of RTD season openers, but you can sense that the insistence that this is a light, fun family entertainment show feels a bit harder in that, from the fact that there's literal babies to all the, body humor jokes. And then you get something like 73 Yards, which feels in more than a few ways a little bit like his episode from series 4 of Midnight. That sort of, let's put the focus on people's reactions to a thing and not care so much about explaining what that thing is or why. Let's focus on how people deal with it. And it feels like he took that same core idea and cranked it up even higher with 73 Yards, which in a way that worked very much for me, but may have left other people a little bit cold. And again, with the finale, as I noted in my review, it's pretty much in line with what RTD tends to do with his finales, not care as much about it. The logistics focus more on the emotions, except it's doing that harder than I think was typical. So in some ways with this season, we got back Russell T Davies as he ran the show before, except it's that more concentrated. And some of that might be an offshoot of the shorter season. Again, 8 episodes is not enough. Did a whole video on that already, and I'm not going to dwell on that fact here. But I will say, I feel like this sense that I had coming away from the season, that it is just a more intense version of what he always was when writing for Doctor Who, feels amplified by how few episodes we actually got. And possibly by the fact that he wrote such a high percentage of them. I think we're getting more guest writers in next season than we had this time. We only had 2 out of 8 episodes written by people other than RTD himself this time. I haven't confirmed that, though, so I don't know if that's actually going to be the case. And maybe if that is the case, even if it is only 8 episodes again, maybe that'll help it not feel quite as concentrated. Because especially if you limit yourself to the episodes that he himself wrote, so disregarding for the moment Boom and Rogue, Space Babies feels very much in line with his kind of opener, but kind of cranked up. Devil's Cord feels kind of in line with the kind of things he would do with more flamboyant villains, cranked up a little bit further than he had done it before. 73 Yards feels like it has that sort of mysterious aspect with Midnight, like I said, but then cranked up a little bit more. And then the 2-part finale, the first episode is all set up in a way that is even more all set up than is typical of his all set up first parts of 2-part finales. And then his finale is even more ignore the logistics and focus on the emotions than he usually is, and he always has been that.
So during the edit, I realized I kind of skipped over Dot and Bubble in that breakdown. For a point of comparison there, I would compare it to Turn Left, as there's some overlap in terms of the social issues it's tackling, though it feels a little bit more targeted and specific than Turn Left. Not to say that's better, but again, a little more concentrated.
So that's sort of my feelings on the season overall. Where the season would rank relative to others, I don't have an answer at this moment in time. It would not be towards the bottom. I can say that with confidence. And the main thing for me to figure out before I go ahead and rank this relative to other seasons, because what I'm actually going to rank in this is the episodes, what I think was the worst to the best. But overall, I am just kind of left thinking where this is going to land in terms of my assessment of how good a season is probably going to hinge on how much I'm going to hold that shorter length episode count against it. Because if I'm going to decide, well, it couldn't be helped, I need to just accept that as a given and evaluate the contents rather than the fact that there should have been more than there was, then it will probably rank a little bit higher. But if I come to the conclusion that it really did hamper the overall experience enough for me, that'll probably put it a little bit lower, but it's definitely not anywhere near the bottom. As for the episodes themselves, I got 8 to rank. Let's start at the bottom, work our way up. Number 8, The Empire of Death. Yeah. Look, there was good stuff in the finale. I talked about it in my review. There's some stuff that I think was excellent even. Some of that emotional stuff, which is where the focus clearly was, did pay off, but not all of it did. And some of it was hampered by the logistics not panning out. And the logistics not panning out can be a nitpick, but when it gets to the point where it's hampering even some of the emotional moments that should be the one thing that you really nail if you're going to take this approach, then you've got a bit of a problem. This is just the most over ramping up of the stakes that the finale has done, and RTD always tended to do that, and the solution just wipes everything clean, and there's just a whole bunch of individual parts regarding Ruby's mother that they try and give an explanation for that doesn't really work without being painful, because it wasn't. It did leave me going, okay. Number 7, Space Babies. So, a bit like the finale, this is just kind of RTD doing what he's always done, and I've not really liked most of his season openers. I think the only one that I really enjoyed was Smith and Jones, because it was a really great companion introduction. But other than that, I don't really like how he opens the seasons, and as a result, I don't super like this. There is enough working in here that there's still fun to be had, primarily in getting to experience and fall into the rhythm of the dynamic of the Doctor and Ruby, because the two of them are bouncing off each other really well, and it gave me the moment for me to fall in love with Ruby as a companion when she was banging, trying to get the bogeyman's attention. And when I can pinpoint in an episode, that's the moment I fell in love with that character, it's doing at least a little bit right. Number 6, The Devil's Chord. Now, I know in my review for this episode, I said at the time I think I prefer Space Babies, and I haven't actually necessarily reversed my position on that. Rather, it's a matter of my issue with The Devil's Chord is primarily a matter of taste. The level of cranked up to 11 and staying there style camp drag that Jinx Monsoon is doing with the character of Maestro, and Maestro is very much the centerpiece of this entire thing, is just not a performance style that I particularly enjoy. And while ultimately this is by no means an objective ranking, it's a ranking of what I feel, I do have to just admit the fact there is not as much that I feel is actually a problem in this beyond just it's not to my taste. And while something not being to my taste is going to put it in the lower half, if I can't point to things a little bit more concrete, like, okay, but this flatly doesn't work, as opposed to that works fine, I just don't like it, that is ultimately going to have me putting it above Space Babies for the purposes of this ranking. Personal taste, it's close. I think I like Space Babies a little bit better, but I do have to admit this is still a better piece of work, even if it's just not to my taste. Number 5, The Legend of Ruby Sunday. So this one had a really great reveal at the end that at the time did get me, but it is primarily set up, and it often can dampen the first part of a two-parter if it's setting up stuff that you don't super enjoy the payoff on. And again, while I did not dislike Empire of Death all that much, there wasn't a lot that really fully worked either. And certainly for all the buildup it had, I kind of left me going, eh. And that in and of itself is going to dampen this episode. And I was already a little bit lukewarm on it, because when you do something that is so fully set up as this is, that last episode is going to carry a lot of weight. It's really got to nail it, and it doesn't. That does drag this down a bit, but even taking it completely in and of itself, there's some cool stuff here. I think the reveal of Sutek is very cool. I love having Mel be back and be more interactive with this. I like the unit team. There's stuff to like, absolutely, but there just isn't a lot of substance to this. Number 4, Rogue. It's fun. I mean, that's kind of it. This is largely a light and fluffy episode. It's a historical setting with some crazy bird creatures, and the Doctor, he gets a crush on this guy. It's pretty basic, and I think it works pretty well. I don't love it exceptionally, partially because, again, romantic aspects in Doctor Who, not my favorite thing overall, especially not when it relates to the Doctor in particular. But I will say that there is an energy and an entertainment. This keeps a good pace. This has a good, fun romp feel to it. And while I wouldn't put it any higher than this, this was a good time. That's kind of all I've got. Number 3, Boom. I've got my nitpicks with this one. There are various aspects that kind of dampened my experience of it on a first watch that may or may not be a problem for me when I watch it again in future, and maybe in future I'll even think better of it than I currently do. But This does still do plenty of stuff right. I like the bottle episode nature of it. I tend to like bottle episodes in general. They have a opportunity to do something really inventive, and making the Doctor be stranded on that thing and having Inshutigawa just deliver so much while being so physically restricted, especially given how much movement has been really big in his depiction of the Doctor up to this point. Yeah, that was a cool challenge to see the show pull off, and I think it pretty much does. There's also just an interesting use of the technology. The ambulance is something to be feared because it might decide you're not worth saving, because it would be more effort to patch you up than to just replace you. Like, that's a really interesting, twisted way to think about medicine. And yeah, maybe the privatization of war and medicine is a bad idea, actually. So it's got some good things on its mind. It's pretty well presented. I had some of my issues with some things related to the kids and how some characters talked about faith, but for the most part, this is good. Number 2. Okay, so these top 2, I went back and forth on a lot. I had a really hard time coming up with this ranking. And this is ultimately where I'm landing today. I've said in the past with a lot of these rankings, you ask me on a different day, I might order them differently. And I think this top 2 would be most likely to swap. But for right now, at number 2, I'm going to put 73 yards. And right. The episode where I said in my review, perfect, no notes, I'm putting it at number 2. And my opinion hasn't changed on that episode. Even when Empire of Death brought some aspects of it back and I got real worried it was going to screw everything up, it didn't. It kept what I loved about this. It's not explained. Because the answers to the things we don't understand wouldn't change the story being told. Because the story being told is about a woman coping with something that happens to her. She can't help it. She can't stop it. She can't even understand it, but she still has to live with it. She has to assign it meaning because it doesn't have any on its own. She has to find a way to view this thing that happened to her so that she can feel that she's lived a meaningful life with this thing as part of her, even if it truly has no meaning. Watching that process and pivoting from this sense of sort of folkloric horror to watching her channel it in the back half with the whole stuff set further down the timeline with Roger Abt-Gwilliam and her attempts to remove him from a very powerful position where he would be incredibly dangerous if placed there. That is an incredible journey for her as a character, and it was amazing for me to watch it, and I wouldn't want a single bit of it changed. I adore this episode. I get why not everyone does, and I don't even necessarily disagree with the problems with it. Kind of like how with The Devil's Cord, I can acknowledge, like, no, it's not that it's bad, it's just that I don't really like it. I can, at the same time, look at this and go, I really like this, but I also get why other people might not. But for me, this is damn near perfect. Not damn near, this is perfect. I would not change a single moment of this. And yet it's my number 2. So let's talk about why that is. Number 1, Dot and Bubble. Here's the thing about Dot and Bubble. As much as I love and adore 73 Yards, every time I think about Dot and Bubble, I think of more ways in which it's just so smartly written. The sneaking in. Again, if you're like me and you didn't clock that we were watching a white supremacist society, this sneaky hiding in of white supremacist moments under the guise of, okay, well, that could just be classism. Okay, so they're like social media addicted. Okay, so like they're a little out of touch. Okay, so they're rude. And finding all these other reasons, thinking it's commentating on all these other things, and then realizing at the end, no, everything that felt off ties to the simple fact that these people are white supremacists. The way in which that is rolled out, the point at which that is confirmed, the fact that it's not treated like a twist, but a reveal. It is the final puzzle piece falling into place, at which point the entire picture makes a kind of sense that it couldn't until you had everything there and you had that piece of information. That fact is load-bearing. And once that is in place, this thing structurally is unassailable. I am not going so far as to say that this is above criticism. I've seen some critiques of it, and I'm not going to negate those. I don't share them, though. I had an incredible experience watching this. I had an incredible experience thinking about it after the fact. I had an incredible experience sitting down and talking through it when I did my review, and I still have an incredible experience thinking back on it even now. The intelligence of the writing, the fact that I really can't hand wave anything about this, because 73 yards, as much as I love it and wouldn't change a thing, I do have to hand wave like, okay, but those explanations aren't important, while acknowledging that to other viewers, they might be. To me, they're not. And I don't think they are to the story, but they will matter to other people, and that'll distance some people from 73 yards. The structure of this, the details planted from the very beginning, the rollout of them, and then if you have not gone back and rewatched this, understanding that these people are white supremacists, go back and watch again and realize how much of it is there and is integrated into everything. This was a phenomenal piece of writing. This is what I would like to see more of from RTD. And I don't even necessarily need it to be covering social issues, but just stripping out the specific meanings and like, don't retain the meaning, but just for a second as an exercise, the ways in which there was a cover story and it was plausibly deniable what was actually going on until you get to the very end, and then it is not, is just so well constructed. I could study this script for ages and find new things to be impressed by. Dot and Bubble, I think, is the best episode of this season. So, that's it. That's season 1. That's not me being done talking about Doctor Who. I will continue to, definitely with a bit less frequency because I won't have new episodes to do. But I've got some other thoughts on some Doctor Who related stuff next month. Trying to remember when this goes out. So there'll be a couple more Doctor Who related videos next month, but Doctor Who stuff is going to slow down a bit. I'll have more thoughts at various points, I'm sure. But for right now, end of a season. End of a moment. Not the end of an era. Not really. The era's still going on. We'll see how it is when we get more. What did you think of the season overall? What did you think of my ranking? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. Those all help me out as well. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings, and until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Jean Foray, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Linda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Renabulax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperol, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toku Bluhuvian, Pal Barabajoggle, and Maraji. If you'd like to hear your name in the credits or even just see them, there are rewards on the Patreon, so maybe check those out.